a millionaire CEO, feared for rejecting every woman who tried to get close to him, never expected his heart to betray him one night. On a quiet metro platform, he saw a poor girl asleep on a cold bench, clutching resumes as if they were her only shield. He left behind his coat and an old compass, never imagining that this single act would lead him back to a forgotten part of his own past, and to the only love he could never refuse. Before we dive into the story, comment below where you're watching from. Enjoy the story, everyone. The metro was colder than usual that night, the kind of chill that seeped through concrete and steel and into people's bones. Fluorescent lights flickered above the empty platform, casting harsh shadows that danced across the tiled floor. It was close to midnight, the hour when the city began to quiet down, except for the rumble of trains sliding into tunnels before disappearing again into the dark veins of Boston. Adrian North had no business being there. Men like him didn't wait for trains, didn't linger in places that smelled of rust and rainwater. He was the type of man whose name commanded entire boardrooms, whose signature could shift markets. His life was a blur of polished offices, glittering galas, and endless contracts. And yet here he was, hands in his pockets, walking along the deserted platform as though searching for something he couldn't name. He stopped when he saw her. A young woman sat slumped on one of the hard steel benches, her thin coat barely covering her trembling shoulders. She had fallen asleep sitting up, her head leaning on her folded arms. A folder lay open in her lap, stuffed with resumes and application letters so crumpled it was clear they had been rejected more times than she could count. A strand of dark hair clung to her cheek, stirred gently by the draft of the arriving train. Adrian's steps slowed. He could have ignored her. He usually did. People were background noise to him, faint outlines moving around his carefully controlled world. But this time something was different. This girl, in her exhaustion, looked achingly familiar. A memory stirred at the back of his mind. A voice, a laugh, the scent of rain-soaked paper, a pair of small hands clutching something he hadn't seen in years. He moved closer without fully realizing why. His chest felt heavy, his breath uneven. Adrian North, who never let emotion cloud his decisions, found himself standing motionless in front of a stranger, his heart racing for no logical reason. She shivered in her sleep, and before he could talk himself out of it, Adrian slipped off his black wool coat and gently draped it over her shoulders. The weight of it seemed to settle her breathing. She didn't stir, didn't open her eyes. For a moment, he allowed himself to simply watch her, this fragile silhouette in a world that had always felt too sharp, too hostile. His hand went instinctively to his pocket. The small object he always carried was there, smooth from years of touch. A silver compass, worn with scratches but still steady in its direction. On the lid, faded but still legible, was a simple engraving, "Find North." He turned it in his palm, and for the first time in decades, he understood what those words might mean. On impulse, he set the compass down beside her hand. His coat, his compass, two pieces of himself he had never given away. Now they rested with a girl whose name he didn't even know. The screech of an approaching train snapped him out of his trance. Adrian took a step back, then boarded without looking at the passengers inside. As the doors closed, he glanced once more through the glass. She was still there, still sleeping, the compass glinting faintly under the buzzing lights. He felt a tug in his chest as the train pulled away, as though he had just left something behind that mattered more than all the contracts waiting for him. Minutes later, Lina stirred awake. At first, she was disoriented. The familiar rattle of the metro, the metallic scent of cold rails. Then she noticed the warmth. A heavy coat draped over her shoulders, too fine, too soft, far beyond anything she could afford. She pulled it tighter, breathing in a faint trace of cedarwood and spice. "What?" she whispered, confusion sharpening her groggy thoughts. Her gaze dropped to the bench. There, gleaming faintly in the harsh light, was a silver compass. She picked it up with trembling fingers. It was heavier than it looked, the kind of object that carried history. The lid snapped open, revealing the steady needle pointing north. She traced the engraving on the top, "Find North," and frowned. Why did those words feel so strangely familiar, as if she'd heard them long ago? Her eyes caught another detail. Tucked beneath the coat was a plastic badge with a logo she recognized instantly. Orden Group Visitor Pass. The badge listed tomorrow's date, 10 a.m., and a single word under purpose: interview. Lina's heart skipped. She hadn't applied there. Orden Group was far beyond her reach. The company belonged to Adrian North, the elusive CEO whose face appeared on every magazine cover, the man whispered about in every business class she'd ever sat through. And yet here it was, a badge with tomorrow's date, as if meant for her. She clutched the compass to her chest, her breath quickening. Maybe it was a mistake. Maybe someone had dropped it. But deep inside, she felt something else. A pull, a direction. The train screeched into the station, and the driver leaned out, shouting, "Last run of the night." Lina stood quickly, gathering her folder of resumes, the coat slipping slightly but still holding warmth against her. She stepped onto the train, the compass tight in her hand, and whispered softly to herself, "Whoever you are, thank you." As the train rattled into the dark tunnels, Lina had no idea her life had just shifted. She didn't know that the man who had left his coat and compass was watching the same city lights from his penthouse window, unable to forget the girl on the bench. She didn't know that tomorrow, in a place she thought she'd never belong, their worlds would collide again. And he didn't yet realize that the compass had finally led him not to north, but to her. The morning rush of Boston was nothing like the silence of the metro at night. Crowds pushed through the station, heels clicking, shoes scraping, voices overlapping. Lina clutched the borrowed coat around her shoulders, her folder of resumes pressed to her chest like a fragile shield. She had barely slept, replaying the moment she had woken up with the compass beside her. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the engraving, "Find North." And now here she was, standing in front of a glass skyscraper so tall it seemed to slice the sky in half. Orden Group. The name was spelled in silver letters above the revolving doors. She'd passed this building 100 times, always from a distance, always imagining what it would be like to walk inside. But it had never been for someone like her. Her hands trembled as she held out the visitor badge she'd found under the coat. She had thought of throwing it away, convincing herself it wasn't meant for her. But something about the compass kept whispering, "Go." The receptionist, a polished woman in a navy blazer, scanned the badge and smiled politely. "Interview 10th floor. Follow the signs." Lina blinked. "You mean, it's valid?" "Yes, of course. Next, please." Her legs felt like they belonged to someone else as she crossed the marble lobby. She caught glimpses of men in suits with sharp jawlines, women in tailored dresses, all moving quickly with purpose. She felt completely out of place in her second-hand blouse and skirt, the hem slightly frayed. But she pressed forward, holding tighter to the compass hidden in her pocket. On the 10th floor, she was greeted by a kind-looking woman in her early 50s. "You must be Lina," she said warmly. "I'm Margaret, Mr. North's executive secretary. We're looking for an assistant to help with administrative overflow. It's a lot of responsibility, but if you're willing to learn, I think you might do well." Lina's throat went dry. "Yes, ma'am. I'd be honored." Margaret handed her a few forms. "Fill these out while I fetch some water." Interviews here can be a bit intimidating, but don't worry. I've been doing this for years. You'll be fine. Lina sat at the polished desk, her pen shaking as she wrote her name across the forms. For a moment, she felt a flicker of hope. Maybe this was real. Maybe the compass had led her here on purpose. She was so focused she didn't notice the man walking past until a low voice broke the silence. "Careful with that pen," he said lightly. "These forms are practically sacred around here." Lina looked up, startled. A tall man stood a few feet away, dressed not in a sharp suit like the others, but in a simple gray sweater and dark trousers. His dark hair was slightly tousled, his features strong yet softened by an unexpected warmth in his eyes. "Oh, I'm sorry," Lina stammered. "I didn't mean to." He smiled faintly. "Don't apologize. Everyone looks like that their first day here. Papers everywhere, hands shaking, wondering if you belong. Trust me, I've seen it all." Something about the way he spoke eased her nerves. He didn't sound like the polished executives rushing through the halls. He sounded human. "I'm Alex," he added, offering his hand. "I work in executive maintenance." Lina blinked, shaking his hand carefully. "Maintenance? That sounds important." "You could say that," he replied with a small, almost secretive smile. Her curiosity almost slipped out as a question, but Margaret returned just then with a glass of water. Alex gave Lina one last glance before moving down the hall, his stride unhurried, as if he had all the time in the world. "Who was that?" Lina asked softly. Margaret looked up briefly. "Oh, Alex? He handles special tasks, keeps things running smoothly. You'll probably see him around." Lina nodded, but her thoughts remained tangled. There was something oddly familiar about him. The warmth in his voice, the way his eyes lingered, the steadiness of his presence. Her fingers drifted unconsciously to the compass in her pocket. The rest of the interview passed in a blur. Questions about scheduling, filing systems, answering calls. Lina answered as best she could, her nerves hidden behind a determination carved from years of rejection. When Margaret finally smiled and said, "You're hired," Lina almost cried right there in the office. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice breaking. That night, as she left the building with a small packet of papers tucked under her arm, Lina paused at the revolving door. The glass reflected her tired but smiling face, the faint outline of the coat still draped around her. For the first time in months, she felt like maybe the world hadn't given up on her yet. She stepped outside, clutching the compass. Its arrow pointed north, but Lina didn't look up at the skyline. She looked back at the building, where somewhere on one of those higher floors, a man named Alex had walked past her like he already knew her story. And though she didn't know why, Lina whispered softly into the cold air, "I think we'll meet again." The first week at Orden Group felt like being thrown into a storm without an umbrella. Lina's days started before sunrise, squeezing into crowded trains, clutching her worn folder, and trying to look like she belonged in the sleek marble hallways. Margaret, her new supervisor, turned out to be both demanding and surprisingly kind. She had a sharp tongue that could cut through excuses, but she also had a habit of slipping chocolates into Lina's drawer when the workload became unbearable. "Fuel," she would say, tapping her glasses against the desk. "Every good secretary runs on caffeine and sugar." Lina smiled through the exhaustion, determined not to fail. After years of rejection letters, after nights spent at bus stops and metro platforms, she finally had a job that mattered. She typed until her fingers cramped, filed until her eyes blurred, and ran errands across 27 floors until her legs ached. And still, at night when she collapsed into bed, she whispered thank you to the compass she kept under her pillow. Somehow, she believed it had led her here. It was late on Thursday when she saw him again. The building had emptied hours earlier, leaving only the glow of desk lamps and the echo of her footsteps as she carried a stack of documents toward the archive room. Turning the corner, she nearly dropped everything when a figure appeared at the other end of the hallway. "Working late already?" the familiar voice asked. Lina steadied the papers and exhaled in relief. It was Alex, the man in the sweater, the one who had made her smile on her first day. Tonight, he wore a plain black shirt, sleeves rolled up, as if he had been fixing something. He leaned casually against the wall, watching her with that same quiet intensity. "I don't really have a choice," Lina said, trying not to sound nervous. "Margaret says this is how you learn fast." "She's right," Alex said. "Trial by fire. But you're still standing, so that's a good sign." Lina laughed softly, shifting the papers in her arms. "Barely." He stepped forward, relieving her of half the stack without asking. His hands brushed hers briefly, sending an unexpected warmth up her arm. "Where are these going?" "Archive room down the hall," she replied. They walked together in silence for a few seconds, the echo of their steps filling the corridor. Finally, Lina spoke. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." "Why do you always look at people like you already know them?" Alex raised an eyebrow, amused. "Do I?" "Yes. It's like you're not surprised by anyone. Like you've seen them before." For a moment, his smile faltered, replaced by something unreadable. "Maybe I just pay attention," he said finally. "People say more in silence than they do with words." Lina nodded, though she didn't fully understand. When they reached the archive, she set the documents down and noticed Alex's eyes flick toward the chain around her neck. The silver compass hung there now, hidden under her blouse but catching the light when she moved. "You wear it," he said quietly. Lina touched it instinctively. "Oh yes, I found it. Well, it doesn't matter. It feels like it brings me luck." His gaze softened, but he didn't respond right away. Instead, he stepped closer, his voice dropping lower. "That compass, it's older than it looks. Don't lose it." Her heart skipped. "How do you know that?" Alex hesitated, then smiled faintly, covering whatever thought had crossed his mind. "Let's just say I can tell when something matters to someone." Before Lina could ask more, her phone buzzed with a message from Margaret. She sighed. "Back to work." Alex handed her the last folder. "Don't let them bury you under all this paper, Lina." She blinked. "I don't remember telling you my name." "You didn't," he said, his smile returning like a secret he wasn't ready to share. "Good night." And just like that, he was gone, his footsteps fading into the dim corridor. That night, Lina sat in her tiny apartment, staring at the compass in her hand. The needle glinted under the lamp, pointing north with steady determination. She thought about Alex, the warmth in his eyes, the way he had known her name, the way he had spoken about the compass as if it belonged to him. "Who are you really?" she whispered to the empty room. She didn't know that at that very moment, on the top floor of the building, Adrian North, CEO, billionaire, and the man the world feared, was standing at his window holding a file labeled Emily Carter, assistant secretary. And he was asking himself the same question about her. The rain had begun in the late afternoon, drumming against the skyscraper windows until the city blurred into streaks of silver. By evening, most of the building had emptied, but Lina stayed behind, dutifully typing out minutes from a finance meeting Margaret had tossed on her desk with a brisk, "These by morning, sweetheart." Her fingers ached, her eyes burned, and still she pressed on. The office was hushed, only the occasional creak of the ventilation system breaking the silence. She liked it this way, quiet enough to think, safe enough to breathe without feeling the pressure of 100 eyes. Around 9, she decided to stretch her legs. She wandered through the dim corridors until she found herself outside a small lounge tucked between two executive wings. She had passed it before, never daring to enter, but tonight the door stood slightly open. Inside was a coffee machine, a few worn armchairs, and, unexpectedly, an upright piano pushed against the wall. Its black paint was chipped, its keys yellowed with age, but the sight made Lina's heart quicken. She stepped closer, brushing her fingers lightly across the keys. Music had been her refuge as a child. In the orphanage where she grew up, there had been an old piano, half broken but alive under her small hands. Mrs. Patterson, the caretaker, used to say music was the language the heart speaks when words fail. And whenever Lina played, the world didn't feel so heavy. She hesitated, then sat on the bench. Slowly, she pressed a key. The note rang sharp and hollow, but still it was music. Another note followed, then another until a melody began to form. Without realizing it, her fingers moved into a song she thought she had forgotten. Soft, wandering, filled with melancholy. It was the tune she had hummed as a child while tracing the lines of an old compass one of the boys had once shown her. The compass. Lina froze mid-note. She hadn't thought about that memory in years. A boy with dark hair, mischievous eyes, and a crooked smile. He used to say, "If you're ever lost, just follow north. I'll find you there." Her chest tightened. She shook her head, forcing her fingers back to the keys. Nostalgia was dangerous. It didn't pay rent or keep the lights on. And yet, the melody spilled out of her like a confession. She didn't hear the footsteps until a voice broke the silence. "You know that song." Lina spun around, startled. At the doorway stood Alex, his shirt sleeves rolled to his elbows, his expression unreadable. He stepped inside slowly, as though afraid he might scare her off. I didn't know anyone was here," Lina stammered. "I was just playing. It's been years since I heard that melody," Alex said quietly, moving closer. His eyes didn't leave hers. "Where did you learn it?" Lina bit her lip. "At the orphanage. There was a piano in the common room. One of the boys, he had a music box that played it. We used to listen together." She forced a laugh, though her throat felt tight. "Strange, isn't it? That I still remember it after all this time." Alex stopped just beside the piano. The shadows softened the angles of his face, but his eyes glimmered with something raw, almost painful. "Not strange," he murmured. "Some songs never leave you." Lina's pulse quickened. There was something in the way he said it, like the melody was more than just notes, like it carried a secret he hadn't yet shared. To break the tension, she asked lightly, "Do you play?" Alex hesitated, then sat beside her on the bench. His hands, confident and practiced, touched the keys with ease. A harmony rose under her melody, blending perfectly, as though they had played together before. Lina's breath caught. When the song ended, silence filled the room. Their shoulders brushed. She felt his gaze on her, steady, searching. "You feel it too, don't you?" Alex asked softly. "Feel what?" Lina whispered, though she already knew. "This familiarity, like we've met before, like none of this is new." Her eyes fell to the compass around her neck, hidden beneath the blouse but warm against her skin. She thought of the boy from her childhood, of promises lost to time. She looked back at Alex, and for a fleeting second, she saw the same boy in his expression. "I don't know what I feel," she admitted, her voice breaking, "but it scares me." Before Alex could respond, her phone buzzed loudly with a message from Margaret. Lina stood quickly, clutching her things like a shield. I should go. It's late. Lina. Good night, Alex, she said, too quickly, and hurried out of the lounge. Alone, Alex sat staring at the piano, his hands still resting on the keys. His heart pounded with a certainty he had been denying. He hadn't misremembered. He hadn't imagined the compass. Lina wasn't just a stranger who had wandered into his world. She was Millie, the little girl who had once been his whole world. The girl he had promised to come back for. The days that followed were a blur for Lina. She buried herself in schedules, calls, and endless tasks. Anything to avoid thinking about the way Alex's hands had moved over the piano keys beside hers. But the melody wouldn't leave her. It followed her into her sleep, into her commute, into the quiet moments when she allowed herself to breathe. Margaret noticed her distraction. "You're working hard, Lina," she said one morning, eyeing her with quiet curiosity. "Just don't forget to eat." A secretary who faints at her desk isn't much use to anyone. Lina smiled politely, but her thoughts were elsewhere. She couldn't shake the feeling that Alex knew more than he let on. That he wasn't just some maintenance worker. That he carried a piece of her past she couldn't name. Her suspicions grew a week later when she was asked to deliver a folder directly to the top floor. Mr. North's private office. Margaret handed it to her with unusual formality. "Be respectful," she said. "And don't linger." The elevator ride stretched like an eternity. Lina's palms sweated against the manila folder, her reflection in the mirrored walls pale and nervous. When the doors opened, she stepped into a world unlike any other floor. Dark wood paneling, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, and silence so deep it pressed against her ears. She knocked softly and entered. Behind the massive mahogany desk sat a man in a perfectly tailored suit. His posture was commanding, his presence almost suffocating. And yet, when he lifted his eyes from the papers, Lina's heart stopped. Alex, but not Alex. His hair was perfectly styled, his expression sharp, his voice clipped as he said, "Yes." There was no warmth, no casual charm, no rolled-up sleeves. This was someone else entirely. Adrian North, CEO of Orden Group. Lina nearly dropped the folder. I was told to deliver this." He rose slowly, every inch of him radiating authority. "Leave it on the desk." Her hands shook as she obeyed. She couldn't stop staring. The man before her was the same one who had carried her papers in the quiet hallway, who had played piano with her until their melodies intertwined. But here, in the suit and under the harsh office light, he was unrecognizable. "Alex?" she whispered. His eyes flickered, a shadow of guilt passing across his face. For a moment the mask cracked. Then he sighed, pushing away from the desk. "My name is Adrian," he said finally, his voice lower, almost resigned. "Adrian North." The words hit Lina like a physical blow. She stumbled back a step. "You lied to me. I never meant to." "You lied about everything." Her voice shook. "About who you are, about what you do, about why you were even near me. Maintenance? That was your story." Adrian moved toward her quickly. "I couldn't tell you the truth. You don't understand." "You're right, I don't." Her chest rose and fell with uneven breaths. I thought we were." She stopped herself, biting down on the words before they betrayed her heart. Adrian's expression softened, the CEO's mask falling away to reveal the man she'd met in the quiet halls. "Lina, I swear, none of it was a game. That night at the metro when I left the coat and the compass, it was me. And when I saw you here, I couldn't stay away. I didn't want to be Adrian North, the man everyone fears. I wanted to be Alex. Just Alex. The boy I used to be. The boy who—" His voice faltered. Lina stared at him, her throat tight. "The boy who what?" Adrian stepped closer, his hand trembling slightly as he reached for her. The boy who once promised a little girl he'd come back for her. Her breath caught. Memories surged. The orphanage. The music box melody. The boy with dark hair who had pressed a small compass into her palm and whispered, "If you're ever lost, follow north. I'll find you." Her eyes filled with tears. "Josh?" she whispered, using the name she hadn't spoken in years. Adrian closed his eyes as if the sound of it both hurt and healed him. "Yes, Joshua. They called me Adrian when I was adopted. But I never forgot you, Millie." The compass around her neck felt suddenly heavy, burning against her skin. Lina's knees went weak. "All this time, it was you." He cupped her face gently, his thumb brushing away a tear. "I searched without knowing how to find you. And then, by some miracle, there you were. At the metro, asleep on a bench. And I knew." Her heart warred with her mind. Every part of her wanted to collapse into his arms, to believe in destiny, in promises kept. But anger still burned. "You should have told me. You should have trusted me." "I was afraid," he admitted, his voice breaking. "Afraid that if you knew the truth, you'd walk away. And I couldn't bear losing you again." Lina looked at him, really looked at him. The powerful CEO, the boy she had once trusted, the man who had risked breaking her heart just to be near her. And something inside her cracked wide open. She stepped closer, her voice trembling. "You already lost me once, Josh. Don't you dare do it again." Before he could respond, she kissed him. It was hesitant at first, then desperate, as though years of separation and silence collapsed into a single breath. His hands tangled in her hair, hers clutched his lapel, and the world around them fell away. When they finally broke apart, both were breathless, their foreheads pressed together. "This changes everything," Lina whispered. "No," Adrian corrected softly, his voice steady for the first time. "This is everything." For 3 days, Lina floated between disbelief and fragile hope. Every time she remembered Adrian's confession. Josh, the boy from the orphanage, her Josh. Her heart swelled and ached in equal measure. He had found her again. He had kept his promise, even if it had taken decades. And yet, the lie gnawed at her. She replayed every moment they'd shared since that first day in the building. The mysterious way he knew her name, the way he'd spoken of the compass, the smile that seemed too familiar. If only he'd told her sooner. If only he had trusted her with the truth instead of hiding behind Alex. By Friday evening, she was unraveling. Margaret had left early, muttering something about dinner reservations, leaving Lina alone with a mountain of files. She worked mechanically, trying to distract herself, until the soft knock came at the door. Her breath hitched before she even turned. Adrian stepped in quietly, no longer the imposing CEO, but the man who had kissed her as though he'd waited a lifetime. His tie was loose, his hair slightly mussed, and his eyes, those eyes, were filled with something between desperation and hope. "Lina," he said softly. She straightened, clutching a stack of papers like a shield. "Mr. North." The title was deliberate. He flinched at it. "Please," he began, stepping closer. "Don't shut me out. Not now. Not when I've finally." She cut him off. "Finally what? Lied enough? Pretended enough? Played both sides until I didn't know who you were?" Adrian's jaw tightened. "I never pretended with you. Every word, every moment. Those were real. Real." Her voice cracked. "You watched me struggle. You let me believe you were just some kind man sneaking around after hours. You stood beside me at that piano and didn't tell me you were the very person I was breaking myself in this office to serve. I wanted you to see me," Adrian said, his voice rough. "Not the title. Not the money. Just me. The boy you once knew. But that's not fair, Lina whispered fiercely. You chose when to be honest. You controlled what I knew, what I felt. You made me believe in someone who didn't exist. He reached for her, but she stepped back. Lina, he pleaded. I can't lose you again. Not after finding you. Her eyes blurred with tears. You already did. The words hung between them like a final verdict. For a moment, Adrian just stood there, his expression broken in a way that made her want to take it back. But she forced herself to stay still, to hold her ground, because trust was more than childhood promises and desperate kisses. It was honesty, and without it, she had nothing. She shoved the papers onto the desk and grabbed her bag. I can't do this, Adrian. Not like this. He moved to block her path, panic flashing across his features. At least let me explain. Give me one chance. I gave you that chance the first night you called yourself Alex, Lina said, her voice trembling but steady. You wasted it. His throat worked as though swallowing words he couldn't bear to speak. Millie, he whispered, her childhood name breaking from his lips like a prayer. Her chest squeezed painfully, but she didn't stop. She pushed past him, the scent of his cologne clinging to her as she walked out. The elevator doors closed before he could follow, sealing the distance between them. That night, Lina sat on her bed with the compass clutched in her hands. The silver was cool against her skin, but the memory burned, Josh's boyish grin, his promise to come back. She pressed her forehead against the chain and wept. How could the boy who once meant everything feel like a stranger now? Across town, in a penthouse that looked over the glittering skyline, Adrian sat alone at his piano. The melody of the music box poured from under his hands, aching and raw. He closed his eyes, remembering the orphanage, the little girl who had been his anchor, the way she had looked at him in the office before walking away. For the first time in years, the ruthless CEO felt powerless. Not against markets or competitors or shareholders, but against a woman who had taken his heart with her the moment she stepped into that elevator. 2 weeks passed. For Lina, they were the longest 14 days of her life. She went through the motions at work, answering phones, filing documents, keeping Margaret's calendar, but her heart wasn't in any of it. Every time she passed the top floor, she avoided even glancing at the CEO's office. She didn't dare. But late at night, when she lay awake staring at the cracked ceiling of her apartment, the compass on her nightstand glimmered in the streetlight, and she remembered Josh's laughter, his promise, the way Adrian, no Josh, had kissed her like nothing in the world mattered more. Her anger hadn't disappeared, but the emptiness without him was worse. For Adrian, the 2 weeks had been unbearable. He had thrown himself into work with ruthless precision, silencing anyone who dared ask about his mood. But when the offices emptied and the skyscraper grew quiet, he sat alone at the piano in the executive lounge, playing the melody that belonged to them both. Margaret was the only one brave enough to confront him. "Sir," she said one evening, placing a cup of tea beside him, "sometimes being strong means admitting you were wrong." He didn't answer, but the truth in her words weighed heavier than any report. The night of the annual charity gala arrived. Reed Enterprises was one of the main sponsors, and Margaret insisted Lina attend to help with coordination. Lina protested at first, but refusing was impossible. She wore a simple navy dress, one she had borrowed from her roommate, and tried to blend into the crowd of glittering gowns and tailored tuxedos. The hotel ballroom was drenched in gold light, crystal chandeliers gleaming over hundreds of guests. Laughter and music swirled through the air, but Lina felt like a ghost wandering among strangers. Then she saw it. On the stage, as part of the evening's entertainment, stood a grand piano, and seated at it, Adrian. Her heart lurched. The room hushed as his fingers touched the keys. He began to play not some polished classical piece, but their melody. The one from the compass, from the orphanage, from the nights they had stolen back in the office. The notes soared, raw and imperfect, but filled with an aching honesty that stripped him bare before everyone. Gasps rippled through the crowd. They were used to the cold, untouchable CEO. Not this man, vulnerable, exposed, searching the audience with every chord. Lina stood frozen, tears blurring her vision. He wasn't hiding anymore. This was his confession, his apology, his plea. When the song ended, silence lingered for a breath before the applause erupted. Adrian didn't bow. His eyes found hers across the sea of glittering strangers, and in them she saw not the CEO, not the liar, but the boy who had once promised he'd come back. Her feet moved before her mind caught up. She slipped past waiters and guests, her pulse pounding, until she reached the side of the stage. Adrian was already there, stepping down, every line of his face etched with hope and fear. "Lina," he breathed, as if her name was the only thing that could keep him alive. Her voice trembled. "You played our song, in front of everyone. I don't care who knows anymore," he said, his eyes shining. "I don't care about titles or masks or walls. I just care about you, about keeping my promise." Tears spilled down her cheeks. "You broke my trust, Adrian." "I know," he whispered, "and I'll spend every day proving I can earn it back. Not as Adrian North, not as the CEO, as Josh, as the boy who never stopped looking for his Millie." Her breath hitched at the name. No one else in the world called her that. Only him. The dam inside her broke. She stepped forward, her hands trembling as she reached for his face. "I hate that you lied," she said through tears. "But I hate living without you even more." His lips curved into the first true smile she had seen in weeks, raw and unguarded. "Does that mean?" "Don't make me say it twice," she whispered, before pressing her mouth to his. The world dissolved into light and music as their kiss deepened, sealing the years of separation, the weeks of silence, the wounds of betrayal. Around them, applause rose again, but neither noticed. When they finally pulled apart, foreheads resting together, Lina laughed through her tears. Who would have thought? The boy with the compass, the man at the metro, the CEO in the corner office. They were all you, and they always will be, Adrian murmured. He pulled the compass from his pocket, the very same one he had left with her, and placed it gently into her hand. "No more lies. Wherever north leads, it will be to you." Lina closed her fingers over it, her heart finally steady. "Then let's never be lost again." In the golden glow of the ballroom, with the melody of their song still echoing in the air, Lina and Adrian chose each other. Not just for tonight, not just for the second chance, but for every tomorrow their compass would guide them toward.